Hello everyone, welcome to this Nature Research Academy's online webinar in effective grant writing in partnership with the Egyptian Knowledge Bank. Hi, my name is Hala and I'm going to be facilitating this webinar. I will be helping your trainer Dr. Harry Shirley to run the polls and exercises, and they will be sharing the Q&A sessions. I will also be helping anyone who's having any technical difficulties. Before I hand over to your trainer to get started, I will first show you how to use GoToWebinar, and I'm going to explain how to navigate the GoToWebinar dashboard and how you'll be able to interact with us during this webinar. So please have the dashboard maximized by clicking the orange arrow button at the top of the interface. As part of some exercises, we will be asking you to raise your hand. The button with the picture of the hands allows you to do so. At the bottom of the interface, you will find the question box. Please type to us here if you are having any technical difficulties. If you have problems during the webinar, we recommend logging out and logging back in. You can use the question box for questions or to respond to exercises. There will be a Q&A in the middle of the webinar and the final Q&A at the end. So please submit your questions and we will answer as many as we have time for. Finally, we will be having some polls today. You will be able to vote just by clicking on the screen. Great. So that cover all from my side. I will now hand over to your trainer, Dr. Harry Shirley.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hala, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this workshop this afternoon on grant writing. We've got lots to cover again this afternoon. Thank you again for inviting me here today. It's been a pleasure doing this workshop so far. I hope everybody has found our content useful. I did want to remind our audience that we do have some handout materials. Under the Handouts tab, you will see a participant guide and the slides. Please do remember to download these, as these are yours to keep. I hope they'll be useful for you to look back on all of the content that we're going to be covering today. So in this afternoon's workshop, we're going to look at how to find a good research question for your proposal. We'll then look at tools and techniques that you can use to generate a strong proposal to send to a funding agency. We'll look at ways to generate a good research plan, and then also how to generate impact through the dissemination of your work during the course of your study. This is going to be a criteria that some funding agencies will expect you to have planned within your proposal. So we'll be looking at all of this content. So the first thing we need to think about is how to generate a good research question. Really, one of the key things for you to do is to stay up to date in your research field. So how do we keep up to date in our field? Now, my simple first piece of advice is to read. Make sure that you read papers and preprints within your field. Try to take time out of every day to read, to learn about what other researchers are publishing within your field. Perhaps also find time to read papers outside of your field. I recommend reading papers from a variety of different journals, international journals, and perhaps also regional journals. Try to spend time reading. And I know as a researcher, it's really hard sometimes to find the time out of your day to find time for reading. But do try to find that time. You may wish to take an hour or two out of your morning, or perhaps to read on your commute to work, as this is a really important part of your learning and keeping up to date in your research field. Reading actually lets you become a time traveler. Through reading papers, we're establishing what's been achieved in the past. But also it helps us understand what's currently important in the present. What are researchers achieving today? This also helps you ascertain what modern methods researchers are using. There'll be an expectation in your grant proposal that you're using up-to-date, appropriate, modern methods in order to achieve the aims of your project. So there's lots to learn from reading in terms of what's already been achieved and what's currently being achieved. But also, we can establish what the future is going to look like. Through reading lots of articles, we can establish trends within our research fields. What's likely to be funded tomorrow? What's cutting edge? And what's important and relevant now that's going to lead to exciting projects in the future? By reading, we can establish what is needed to be addressed in the research field. What important research questions remain in our research field? We can therefore establish what the future might look like, okay? And establish what types of projects are likely to be funded. So, my advice to you is simple. Please do spend lots of time reading to learn about your research field. But where else can you find the latest research? Please write any suggestions into the question box. Okay, some suggestions coming in from our audience. Noah has written clinicaltrials.gov. Nancy has written conferences. Some great suggestions there. Web of Science, PubMed. Yes, indeed. Yes, researching databases can certainly be an important way to establish the latest research. Indeed, good suggestions from our audience. Yes, completed research, we may want to look on article databases such as PubMed, Web of Science, but don't forget preprint servers are a great way indeed to keep up to date in your research field. Data repositories can be a useful way to establish what kind of data are being published, but also news articles. You may want to read the news, the science sections of certain news outlets. It can be a great way to learn about completed research. How do we find out about present research that hasn't yet been published? Conferences, of course, are a great way to establish trends within your research field, things that people are working on but they haven't yet published. But discussions with colleagues is a great way to learn about your research field. Simply engage with your colleagues about your areas of research. And you can learn lots through talking to other people, okay? Future research, as we've said already, just by being aware of your research field, you can have an awareness of what research questions are still valuable to your research field, and this can give you an idea of what future research may look like within your field. But also, we may want to look at clinical trial websites, as somebody has written, clinicaltrials.gov.uk. Also, we may want to establish what research trials are being registered. So you may want to look on online registries for research trials, okay? Okay, so as we've said already, attending conferences can be a really valuable way to establish trends within your research field. This allows you to become a forward-thinking researcher and give you an idea of what types of research projects will be funded in the future. It's also an opportunity to network with peers. As we highlighted in this morning's workshop, lots of the funding opportunities are collaborative, aren't they? Collaboration is a great way to gain funding. So do be sure to use conferences to network with other researchers and build up these connections that could potentially become collaborations, okay? having peers within your network is also an opportunity for you to discuss trends within your field. Believe me, you can learn lots from other researchers. All of these things are going to be reflected in your proposal. The grant reviewers are going to be impressed that you're aware of these trends within your research field and that you are a forward-thinking researcher who's not only aware of published research, but unpublished research. I do also recommend engaging online to learn lots about your research field and lots about what other researchers are up to. You can really gain unique insight by engaging researchers online. You may wish to read scientists' blogs. Now, on this page, I've highlighted a chemist called Phil Barron, and he has a really great blog which is frequently updated discussing what his research group are currently investigating in the lab. Okay, so this is information that you wouldn't necessarily be able to find in their publications. They sometimes supplement all of their publications with extra information, or they'll talk about work that they haven't yet published. So do explore blogs of scientists. Now, I do also suggest using Twitter as a platform to engage and learn about other researchers' work. Here, I've highlighted two well-known scientists, Carrera and Brimble, and they are an example of scientists who frequently share their opinions, share research articles online. They often share work that they're impressed with. This is a great way for you to keep up to date in your research field, but also to understand what other scientists are thinking. Use these expert researchers to learn about your research field. So I do recommend engaging on Twitter, create yourself a Twitter account, but also that way you can share papers and articles and opinions that are interesting to you. And indeed, it can be a great way for you to network and engage with other scientists. Okay. As I've highlighted already, it can be really useful to use news outlets as an opportunity to learn about other research. How often do you read articles from outside of your own field? It's not very common. Okay, normally as a researcher, we read articles closely related to our own work. But remember, interdisciplinary research is an excellent way to advance your field. It's an opportunity for you to learn and establish new ideas, new techniques. You can gain highly novel findings through being an interdisciplinary scientist. Now, for these reasons, funders love collaboration. Okay, as I said already, use conferences as an opportunity to engage researchers outside of your field, but also do spend time learning about science outside of your field and thinking of exciting collaborative ideas. This may increase your chances of being accepted for funding. As I say, funders love collaboration because they're more likely to generate exciting new ideas, techniques, and findings. Okay. So I do recommend exploring the news and views section of Nature, and you can go onto the Nature website to access our news sections. And this way you can learn lots about research in other fields. Okay. So I think we've established there some great ways to keep up to date in your research field, but also in fields outside of your area of specialism. Really, my guidance is, though, to read. Make sure you do lots of reading every day. Journal articles, preprints, engage online, but also read news and views articles in various different news outlets such as Nature. Okay, so we've prepared ourselves. We're now a well-read scientist who's up to date in our research field. Now is our opportunity to think about generating a research question. So, how do we go about preparing our research question. So, you've had your eureka moment. You've found a research question that you're interested in answering. The first thing we need to establish is what are the objectives of your study. In other words, how are you going to address, how are you going to answer the research problem? So we need to clearly define and explain our objectives. Okay, so some guidance for you is to think about installing SMART objectives. SMART objectives are specific. They're focused on an important issue. The key word here being focused. Don't try and answer lots of different questions. Try thinking about answering a specific research question using specific objectives. Okay. But we also want our objectives to be measurable. Okay. Do the appropriate methodologies actually exist for us to address the research question? Are the objectives achievable? Do you have the expertise? Do you already have the skills required to implement your objectives? Do you have the resources and technology? Okay. Realistic. Are your objectives feasible? In other words, are you going to be able to implement your objectives in a suitable time frame? Are you going to be able to achieve your objectives in a suitable amount, using a suitable amount of money? Is the funder going to be able to give you enough money for you to achieve your objectives? So think about whether your objectives are realistic in this way. Are they timely? As we said already, this is related to being realistic. Can you achieve your objectives in a suitable time frame? Okay, so think about installing SMART into your objectives. Also, all good objectives will have three key elements. They will have a variable, an outcome, and a sample. Okay, every objective must have all three. The variable is simply what you are investigating. The outcome is going to be what you're measuring, and the sample, of course, is from where the measurements are taken. Great. Well, we're going to go on to our third activity today, and you'll see this on page 6 of your participant guide. Now, I've provided you here with 3 objectives. I'm going to give the audience a few minutes to read over this. After that time, I'll be asking you, which of the following research objectives would be more fundable? So I'll leave this on the screen just for a few minutes for you to read over. Okay, I hope everybody has had a chance to read over those now. So Hala, could we please launch the next poll?
Yes, sure, Dr. Harry. So the poll is now available on the screen. Please select one answer. Great. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. I will now close the poll. And you can now see the results on the screen.
Great, thank you so much, Hala, and thank you to our audience. There's a bit of a split there, really. A third have gone for A, about a third have gone for B as well, and then 40% have gone for C. Very interesting. Thank you, everybody, for engaging in that poll. We can now hide that, please, Hala. Now, I think A is probably the best objectives we have here. With objectives A, we have a clear aim, we have a clear variable, which is cost-effective surface modification. We have a clear outcome, improve efficiency of water treatment membranes in removing microbial-contamination. And also we have a clear sample, freshwater reservoirs at varying altitudes. Now, what do we think might be problematic with aim B? Please put your suggestion into the question box. Okay, some suggestions coming in. Not specific, no outcomes, not clear. It is broad, no time limit, no clear, not clear and defined. Okay, some good suggestions there from our audience. The problem with these aims are that they are what we called a fishing expedition. Remember, we want to be smart, specific, and measurable in particular. Here we have a non-specific variable. They just generically say cost-effective way. Well, we need to actually be more specific here. When we have a non-specific variable, as I say, this is what we call a fishing expedition. They do have a clear outcome, the removal of microbial contamination, and a clear sample, freshwater reservoirs. So to improve these aims, I would recommend that they make the variable more specific. Okay, let's have a look at aim C. What is problematic with aim C? Please write your suggestion into the question box. Okay, some suggestions in now. Someone's written that the outcome is not clear. Yeah, it covers only just one modification without other alternatives. So I think here really one of the issues with this aim is that it's too specific. The variable is highly specific, titanium dioxide. Why not use a more generic term like oxidized metals? They have a specific outcome to reduce streptococci contamination. They could maybe have it more broad and just have microbial contamination. They also have an unclear sample. They say higher versus lower altitudes. They need to be more specific in defining what they mean by these. Okay, but here really the main issues are the specific variable and the outcome is also too specific. Great. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for engaging in that activity. Let's now have a think about writing our proposal. Now, let's have a think about some steps that we should take before we actually start writing our proposal. You've established your brilliant idea, okay? Well done. You've established a research question through all of your reading. You're also now aware of what reviewers have in mind when they're looking at applicants. You also know some of the key criteria that reviewers will be looking at when establishing the suitability of your project for funding. So maybe we're ready to start writing our proposal. Not yet. Before we start writing our proposal, we need to be sure that we've thoroughly read the guidelines of the funder. Okay, you wouldn't just start building IKEA furniture or other flat pack furniture without reading the guidelines. So be sure that you know what the expectations and requirements are from the funder. Earlier we discussed Horizon Europe, didn't we? These are the guidelines. This is the application form that provides lots of useful information. As you can see here, it's 47 pages long. Okay. My recommendation is to read every single page. Okay. You need to be aware of all of the requirements and expectations before you start writing your proposal. Okay, so I wanted to highlight just some key formatting points from the Horizon Europe framework. Do be sure to investigate these yourself, but I just wanted to highlight some key features. They typically use 11-point font, Times New Roman, and they require you to have a 15mm margin. The proposal should also be 100 pages max. They also expect you to communicate effectively throughout your proposal. You can use bold for emphasis. They do recommend using the active voice more than the passive voice. Make sure you use figures and models to clarify different parts of your proposal. Try to use as much of the page space as possible. So, now we've read the instructions, perhaps we're ready to start writing. No, not yet. Don't just jump into writing your proposal straight away. My recommendation is to firstly start with an outline. Outlines can save you a huge amount of time. Well, why? It's quicker to write an outline. It's less stressful. Also, it's easier to get input from collaborators, to get feedback from colleagues, and then make a quick amendment to the outline. You can modify and refine an outline quite easily. You can then use your finalized outline as a blueprint to build the proposal. Okay, so do be sure to start with an outline. Okay, let's have a think about some key components of a proposal. Now, this is really based on the template for Horizon Europe, but this is a similar type of template that you will see from many international funders. And there are really 5 key parts to a proposal at Horizon Europe. They have a method section, objectives, impact, planning, and data. Okay, we'll be looking through all of these now in a bit more detail. So the first part to highlight is the objectives of your proposal. This will be highlighting what exactly you're trying to achieve in your study. Some keywords that I've picked out from the Horizon Europe template are important, relevant, measurable, and achievable. Okay, they expect your objectives to align with all of these descriptors. I think this is similar to our SMART objectives that we discussed earlier. So do be sure that your objectives are appropriate. You can use background information to make sure that your research is given the appropriate context in order for the reviewers to understand the importance of your objectives. Okay, so this part of your proposal will be about 4 pages. So as I said, in order to highlight the importance of your study, we need to be sure that we provide suitable background information and that we highlight what is known about the topic. So we need to discuss the literature. We want to discuss peer-reviewed papers, but also work in preprints or repositories. This section provides the context for your study, but actually it's also an opportunity for you to establish your expertise, to establish your credibility that you are knowledgeable within your field. Okay. So after we've provided that suitable context, it's now an opportunity for us to highlight the research problem. What is your motivation for doing the study? So we're going to be discussing previous research when discussing our objectives. So do be careful here about how much previous research you include. If you only include a very small amount of previous research, this can actually suggest that little research is being done because your topic, your area of work is simply not interesting to the field or society now, and therefore perhaps difficult for people to publish. But if you provide too much previous research, this can suggest that your work is simply not original, or perhaps there's too much competition. Too many people are working on the same topic. So it can be hard to find this delicate balance between providing too much and too little previous research. Do discuss this with colleagues to establish what kind of balance you should try to achieve. Okay. So we do want to establish interest in our topic by providing this background information. So here's an example. Here in this example, taken from Cancer Control, they start with simple background information, explaining why the research topic is important. Over the past 2 decades, excess dietary intake and low physical activity have contributed to an increase in the prevalence of childhood obesity in the United States, affecting a third of children and disproportionately impacting minority and economically disadvantaged children. So we're really establishing that broad interest by providing this context for the study. After that, in this example, they go on to discuss the current state of the field. What's actually being researched now? Evidence for OST nutrition and physical activity interventions has grown in recent years, and notice here how they're using citations to guide the reader through what current publications there are related to this proposal. Then, after we've established interest by providing the context and the current state of the field, we go on to highlight the study motivation. Now that the OSNAP intervention has been rigorously tested and effectiveness has been established, there is a critical need to evaluate training models to disseminate this intervention for broad population reach and impact. So we're highlighting what needs to be done. So that's a great example of providing background information to establish interest from your reviewer. So now is the opportunity to talk about our objectives after we've established the context for our study. Let me ask the audience a question. What is true about novel objectives? Hannah, could we please launch the next poll?
So sure, Dr. Harry. Yes, Dr. Harry, can we please answer this poll in the question box because it's not included in the polls?
Absolutely, yes. I do apologise for that. So please do write into the question box. What is true about novel objectives? Okay, some suggestions coming in from the audience. So for me, I think novel objectives are a great way to improve the novelty of your proposal. But also, it will make your proposal look more risky. So we do need to take that into account. Reviewers will often wonder, why haven't these objectives been done before? So it's important to provide them with background information and information about the current state of the field so they can understand why these research objectives have not been implemented before from other researchers. They may indeed have more confidence that your work will lead to higher impact articles in the future if your objectives are more novel. Okay, so let's have a think about writing our objectives. If you have a novel solution, you do need to emphasize why it hasn't been done before. Okay, let's have a look at this example. This proposal's objective is to determine the impact of the spatial structure and mechanics of Pseudomonas aeruginosa biofilm infections in chronic wounds on virulence, antibiotic resistance, and immune evasion. So the reviewer may be asking themselves, why hasn't this been done before? And as I've said already, you need to provide the context for your objectives. So let's have a look at an example. We start here with a broad introduction to biofilms. Most chronic bacterial infections are caused by biofilms, aggregated bacteria that are embedded in a matrix of polymer and protein. We then go on to establish current knowledge within the research topic. Unlike well-mixed liquid cultures, biofilm infections have a well-defined spatial structure. This spatial structure is given by the sizes of bacterial aggregates, etc. Okay, so explaining and guiding the reviewer through the current knowledge within the field. But then importantly, we highlight to the reviewer recent developments to overcome limitations. Okay. If we highlight recent developments, we're explaining to the reviewer why your objectives haven't been done before. So we're really providing that useful context for the reviewer. Okay, great. Well, we're going to go to the next activity today, and you should see this on page 6 of your participant guide. So here I've given you 3 backgrounds. These are introductions to the background section. They should be providing the context for the study. I'm going to give the audience 2 minutes to read over these, and then I'll be asking you which background is best. Great, so I'll leave this on the screen for a couple of minutes now. Okay, I hope everybody has had a chance to read over them now. So could we please launch the next poll, Hala?
Thank you, Dr. Harry. So the poll I have right now is what is a good start to an introduction?
Absolutely,
So
yeah, that'd be
section.
great. Yeah, let's launch that poll.
Yes, so the poll is now available everyone on the screen. Great. Thank you everyone for your participation. I will now close the poll and you can now see the results on the screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hala, and thanks to our brilliant audience for participating in that poll. I can see there that B is by far the most popular choice there from our audience. So let's hide that poll, please, Hala. And I'm great to say that I agree with the majority of our audience. I think B is a great start to an introduction section. We're providing the broad context for our study. We start broad by highlighting the worldwide importance of our topic, but then we start to narrow down on more specific information relevant to our proposal. Okay, we're highlighting the importance of our proposal. Highlighting here, there are currently no curative or preventative therapies for COVID-19. Okay. Option A, I don't think is as good as option B because they're not really highlighting here why COVID therapy is broadly important. Okay. And option C really doesn't have much background information at all. It really talks specifically about the objectives and aims of the study. We do need to provide that context for our study in order for the grant reviewer to understand the importance of our objectives. Wonderful. Well, we do have time for a break. Please use this as an opportunity to stretch your legs and perhaps have a glass of water. After the break, we'll have time for a question and answer session. So if you have any questions at all, please do put these into the question box. But for now, please enjoy your break. Okay, wonderful. I hope everybody has enjoyed their short break. As promised, we do have time for a question and answer session. So if you have any questions at all, please put these into the question box and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So, Hala, do we have any questions at all from the audience?
Yes, sure, Dr. Harry. We have some questions, and thank you everyone for sending your question in the question box. So the first question is, what other social media platform do you recommend?
Great, thank you so much for the question. What other social media platforms do I recommend? So we were talking earlier about how it's important to do lots of reading, but also using blogs and Twitter to learn lots about what other researchers are doing and keeping up to date in your research field. Um, so alongside blogs and Twitter, I can recommend using LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great way to keep up to date with what other professionals are doing. Lots of researchers are on LinkedIn and they will share um, information about their research, but also their own interests in their research field. So I recommend creating yourself your own LinkedIn page. And use this as an opportunity to network with other researchers as well. Um, there are other websites. Reddit can have some nice um, scientific related subreddits to learn about specific fields. It can be useful to learn about fields outside of your specialism. Um, those would be my recommendations. Lots of researchers even share their work on YouTube now. You might see some interesting um, video blogs on Twitter from various different scientists. Again, if you want to learn about science outside of your own field, these can be great. But yeah, thank you so much for the question. I hope you find some useful platforms to learn lots about science.
Great. And we have another question. How can I learn about research outside of my field?
Great, thank you so much for the question. How can I learn about research outside of my field? Well, I think there are really various options here. As we just said, please use social media as a way to learn lots about what scientists are doing, perhaps within, but also outside of your field. A great way to learn about research outside of your field is news articles. So you may want to read news outlets to establish what's currently being researched outside of your field. Of course, news articles are a lot easier to read and they're more accessible than research articles. So if you're less familiar with a research field, you may wish to read the news article. And then after you've read the news article, you could perhaps read the full scientific article afterwards. But yeah, do use news articles as a great way to learn about research outside of your field. Thank you so much for the question.
Great. Thank you a lot, Dr. Harry, for the very informative Q&A, and thank you everyone for sending your questions. And we'll be having another Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please submit your question, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hala. And thank you to our audience for those brilliant questions there. I look forward to our second question and answer session. So we've just discussed in some detail the various sections of our proposal. Now let's have a think about the method section within our proposal. How are you going to meet your objectives? So it's important within your proposal to go into some detail here to explain the concepts, models, and assumptions that you're going to make in your proposal. Are there potential limitations or pitfalls when implementing your methods? Also consider collaboration as a key point of this section. Are there perhaps some methods and techniques that you're not familiar with, but your collaborators are going to be focused on? At this point in your proposal, it's useful to highlight who will be responsible for implementing various different methods to ensure that the grant reviewer has confidence in your proposal. So when we describe each objective, we want to be sure to describe the methodology associated with that objective. Okay. We do want to use schematics and visuals to make the information easy to understand for the reviewer, but please don't add too much information. Too much information will, of course, confuse the reviewers. We don't want to be confusing them. So, for example, this schematic here isn't very clear at all, in my opinion. There's too much information. So do be sure to limit the amount of information you use in schemes and figures, okay? So we want to be explaining our experimental techniques within the method section of our proposal. My recommendation is to provide one technique at a time, but also notice here how we're addressing the individual aim that the techniques are going to be used to answer. So you may wish to have a title which encompasses the objective and then the techniques afterwards, explaining how they're going to be used to fulfill the objective. Okay, so we've got different techniques here, and notice how we're going to quite a lot of detail explaining exactly how the technique will be implemented. Okay. So if we're going to be using new methodology within our proposal, we need to ensure the reviewer that the method is going to be feasible, okay? That you have the expertise to obtain the validated data. But because this is a new methodology, there is an element of risk. Therefore, it can be useful in your proposal to have a contingency plan. What are your backup plans if methodologies do not work properly, or perhaps as expected? Raise your hand if you think you should describe potential pitfalls in your methods section of your proposal. So, Hala, do we have any hands raised?
Dr. Harry, yes, we have around 8% only from the participant raised their virtual hands.
Okay, great to see that some of the audience have raised their hands there. I completely agree with those who have raised their hand. I think it's really important to highlight potential pitfalls in your study design. How do we go about discussing potential pitfalls? Well, simply start by highlighting the potential problem. Okay, let's read this out. It is possible that AB-driven macrophage effector functions are independent of the inflammasome, the phagosome or autophagy, and that they instead act as markers of bacterial trafficking rather than direct mediators. So we're highlighting here a potential problem. What's the source of the problem? A plethora of additional effector functions, such as antimicrobial peptides, radical formation, and sequestration of nutrients and metal, may be at play. Okay. What's going to be the solution to the potential pitfall? One strategy to widen the breadth of discovery is to utilize RNA sequencing technology already developed in the Fortune and Alta labs to more broadly assess gene regulation upon the treatment with a AB from individuals with LTB versus ATB. So that's the general structure for a contingency plan. Simply state the potential problem, what's the source of the problem, and what potential solution you will have to these potential pitfalls. Okay. Great. Well, the next section of our proposal is going to be related to data. You will be expected to implement, create a concise data management plan. Okay, this is going to be explaining how you're going to store and share your data throughout the course of your study. And we want to be using FAIR principles when implementing our data plan. We'll be discussing FAIR principles in a couple of slides. Now, this section of your proposal for Horizon Europe will typically be about 1 page, okay? So you will find that research data policies are being more widely implemented, both at publishers, but also funders in recent times. Why is this? Well, data sharing helps increase reproducibility of your research. Why are you conducting your research in the first place? You want your work to be influential and impactful within your research community. What use is your work if it's not reproducible? So we do need to make sure that we share our data, not only when we publish, but perhaps during the course of our study as well. This helps increase transparency in research and allows or increases the reusability of our work, okay? And as I say, this is part of a wider movement of open science. We're seeing that science is becoming more transparent, accessible, and therefore reusable for other researchers, okay? So it is important to be aware of expectations from funders. As I've said, with Horizon Europe, you will be expected to implement a research data management plan. It's important that you have this in place. You will be expected to share your research data at various different points within your research. Here's a quote from the European Research Council. They say, the European Research Council supports the basic principle of open access to research data. It therefore recommends to all its funded researchers that they follow best practice by retaining files of all the research data they have produced and used during the course of their work, and that they are prepared to share these data with other researchers whenever they are not bound by copyright restrictions, confidentiality requirements, or contractual clauses. So, what does this mean for you? You need to have a data management plan. Your data should be fair. Now, the fair data principles mean that your work should be findable. Make sure people can find your work, find your data. Make sure that they can access your data. Make sure your data can be used by other researchers, that it's interoperable. And indeed, that you have suitable licenses, meaning your work is reusable. Now, this might all sound like a bit overbearing, but really the best way to comply with fair data principles is simply using a data repository. A data repository is a platform, typically a website, where you can upload your data for other people to find, access, and reuse. So consider data repositories as an important part of your data management plan. Let me ask the audience a question. What are the benefits of using a data repository? Please write your suggestions in the question box. Okay, sharing data with others. Easy to find relevant data, increasing your citations. Ahmed's written clarity, Amal's written modifications to your work. Some great points there from our audience, and I really do agree there. I think some of the key benefits are that if you use a data repository, your data is guaranteed to be preserved over time, okay? It's secure, it's a safe way to store your data. Many repositories will have guarantees of preserving your data up to 10 years, okay? If we use a repository, our data is going to be findable. Other people can search for topics they're perhaps interested in and locate our data and therefore use our data. If we use a repository, access to and storage of the data is managed by the repository. Therefore, you don't have to do anything. It's really quite convenient once you've uploaded your data. Now, there are many different repositories available. These will not be managed by the funder. You will be expected to find a suitable repository for your data. So I do recommend using data lists, because research repository lists, because there are thousands of data repositories. Two popular repository lists are re3data.org and fairsharing.org. These are expansive lists of repositories. I do recommend that you explore. You can search by discipline, for example, to find the most suitable repository for your research data. Okay, so there we have it. That's the basics of your research data management plan. Do be sure to explore suitable repositories for your data to help um, um, ensure that your data is fair. Okay. So let's have a think about the planning part of our proposal. We will often need to provide a work plan when we apply for funding, and in Horizon Europe, you're expected to implement and create this over 4 pages. So you want to provide a work plan that has suitable timings. You also want to highlight risks involved at various points of the project. My recommendation is to make your plan as visual as possible. Therefore, a Gantt chart can be a great way to implement a good work plan. Okay, so let's have a think about how to go about starting to create our Gantt chart. Well, before you actually get started on the Gantt chart itself, simply list everything that you will have to do in the research project. Then estimate the amount of time, perhaps, that is required for each step. Really, just scribble down everything. It may look something like this: an initial catalyst screen, and then how long it will take. Okay, so this may be quite a long list. So once we've scribbled everything down, my recommendation is to put activities in order. What activity are you going to be doing first, and then eventually last? Then assign participants who's going to be responsible for each activity. And then you can tidy up your list at the end. Then your list may look something like this. Okay, where we have our task, the time scale for the task, and then who will be responsible for it. Okay, now we can start creating our Gantt chart. Now I do recommend using Microsoft Excel as a way to generate a simple Gantt chart. So if you haven't made one before, then Excel would be a great starting point. I recommend simply using the simple Gantt chart as highlighted here. And now you can start adding in the different tasks and the dates to your Gantt chart on Microsoft Excel. Okay, so do visualize your work plan and your proposal to ensure that the reviewer can clearly see the different tasks, who's assigned to the tasks, and how long you've assigned to the task. This will help your reviewer establish confidence in your proposal. Okay, so one of the last sections we'll discuss now is the impact. As part of your proposal, you're expected to explain how you're going to disseminate your work and to generate impact, not only after the work has been published, but during the course of your study. What measures are you going to make to maximize impact? How are you going to disseminate your work? Also, funders are really interested in hearing ways that you're going to inform society about your work during the course of your study, but also at the end. So your impact plan should be about 5 pages. Really, it's up to you to think about how you're going to disseminate your work. Let me ask the audience a question. How can we disseminate our research? Please write your suggestions into the question box. Okay, some suggestions coming in from Ahmed, social media, ResearchGate, Orchid, publishing research articles, conference presentations, the media. That's a great suggestion there. International journals and conferences, open access, publish research in open journals, use websites such as ResearchGate, Orchid, Publons. Great suggestions there from our audience. Okay, great. Yeah, really, there are loads of ways we can disseminate our work, really. And as part of your impact plan, try to implement as many different ways as possible. Now, we have the traditional ways of dissemination: research papers, preprints, presentations at conferences, perhaps poster presentations at conference as well. I call these the 4 Ps. As I say, these are traditional ways. Do try to think about things that you can do online as well to demonstrate open science in addition. So, web pages. Why not create a web page for your project? You can create a blog type website where you can update researchers and remember society about what you're doing in your project, what you've achieved so far. Indeed, social media, make sure you have social media activity to promote your project. Also, do check out science events online. There are lots of different types of event where scientists talk about and disseminate their work. Okay, so do demonstrate the 4 Ps, the traditional ways to disseminate, but also make sure that you demonstrate modern dissemination online. So I do recommend, again, Twitter. I do recommend this is a great way to reach broad audiences quickly. My recommendation actually is to create a Twitter account for your project. The account is going to be dedicated to this project. Follow influential people within your research field and target audiences. Then you can share updates related to your research project and engage other researchers throughout the course of your study. Now, when you do post on Twitter, I recommend using hashtags to make sure that your work is more visible. Videos actually gain lots of attention on social media. Videos are actually shown to gain more retweets on average. So think about a way that you can share your work via video. You'll also see live events on Twitter. They can be useful to engage in. Final recommendation, follow the funder. So if you're applying for Horizon Europe, follow Horizon Europe 1 on Twitter, okay? Great. Thank you, everybody, for engaging in today's workshop. It's been a brilliant session. I hope it's been useful for you. We looked at ways to generate a good research question, and then we looked at how to generate a good research proposal and research plan yourself. And then we looked at ways to generate impact both during the course of your study, but also after. So, thank you again for coming today, and thank you for all of your brilliant questions. We do now have time for another question and answer session. So, if you have any questions at all, please do put these into the question box. So, Hala, do we have any questions at all from our audience?
Yes, Dr. Harry, thank you so much, everyone, for sending your questions. We do have some questions received. So, one of our participants is wondering, can they use LinkedIn as well as a social media platform?
Yes, absolutely. I do recommend using LinkedIn as a great platform to network with other researchers and to engage with researchers online. You'll see lots of eminent professionals, professors, PhD students engage on LinkedIn. So do be sure to create your own account and start engaging with people using LinkedIn. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Harry. And another question here, how long does it take to write a proposal?
Well, it really does depend on the funder you're applying for. It depends on the length of the proposal. So what I do recommend is make sure that before you write your proposal, you've read the instructions and guidelines very clearly. There'll often be guidance from the funder related to how long various sections should be. For Horizon Europe, the limit is 100 pages overall, but as you've seen today, they do provide guidance on roughly how long each individual section should be as well. So just make sure you establish all of this information before you start writing your proposal, so to save yourself time down the line. But each funder is different, and this information should be available on the funder's website. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Harry. And another question, if I discuss previous work, won't it make my work less novel?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. If I discuss previous research, will it make my work look less novel? Well, you do need to find the right balance. You do need to explain to the reviewer why your work is important. Therefore, it's useful to highlight previous studies to give the researcher context for your study. Once they have context, they can understand why your research question is important. Without the context, without explaining previous studies, it's hard to explain to a reviewer that your research is important. But we also don't want to highlight too many previous studies, as this would make your work look like it's already been fully addressed. Okay. We don't want it to look like there are lots of researchers within the field and it's a saturated area of research. So we do need to find this balance between establishing how much background information to include within our introduction and background section. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Harry. And we did receive another question in the question box where I can read news articles. Any suggested website?
Well, I do recommend the Nature website. Nature have a great news and views section, and it highlights really important research from various different fields. So do be sure to check out the Nature news and views section, as I think this is really good. I also recommend The Guardian, which is a British newspaper. This is a really good outlet for some scientific news articles. So you may wish to explore articles on the Guardian website. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harry, for the very informative Q&A, and thank you everyone for your engagement and active participation in today's webinar and for your questions. And I will now hand over again to Dr. Harry for some final points.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hala. And thank you to our audience for today's workshop. It's been a brilliant session. Just before we end, I'll make some important final points. You will receive a link to the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email after 3 p.m. tomorrow. Please fill out one feedback survey for today's two webinars in the follow-up email after 3 p.m. tomorrow. You'll receive your certificate 1 to 2 weeks after the survey has been completed. Don't forget, please, to download your handout materials. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. Thank you, Hala, for all of your help today. We can now end today's workshop.
Thank you, Dr. Harry, and thank you for joining us today, everyone. And we hope you have enjoyed this virtual workshop. I will now end the webinar. Goodbye.